Evolution. It's pretty cool. You've probably already heard of it. The change in heritable genetic characteristics over many generations within a population of living things. It's been going on for quite a while, and it's basically the only scientific explanation we have for the insane amount of biodiversity that we see in our incredible world. Now, Pokemon. What does evolution have to do with Pokemon? And no, I don't mean that kind of evolution. I mean how it works in the real world. Descent with inherent modification. Are Pokemon as we know them in the games the result of millions and billions of years of evolution, just like all the organisms in our world? I say yes. Since 2020, I have been making my own version of a Pokemon phylogenetic tree of life that contains every known Pokemon, from red and blue all the way up to scarlet and violet. I posted a version of this chart to the Pokemon subreddit back in 2021, and it did pretty well. However, since my brief time in the Reddit spotlight, I have been working tirelessly to create a version of the tree that is even better than the one before. More detailed, better looking, but most importantly, up to date with all the wacky new creatures that Game Freak has decided to throw our way for Generation 9. And now that my work is complete, it's time to put my fledgling YouTube channel to good use and make a multi-part series dedicated to breaking it down. So what actually is a phylogenetic tree? How does all of this even work? Phylogenetic sounds like a really big, scary word, but it's basically just the study of the evolutionary history and relationships between different groups of organisms. A phylogenetic tree is basically just a diagram that traces lines of evolutionary descent, outlining which groups are descended from and related to other groups. These relationships are determined by looking at the traits of the organisms, be that traits that you can plainly see with the naked eye, all the way down to mutations in the genetic code. Phylogenetic trees are often not perfect, but are a fantastic tool for illustrating the hypothesized relationships between different organisms based on the best available evidence. The construction of a phylogenetic tree is made up of nodes, which represent the most recent common ancestor to everything within a certain group. The lines that branch from these nodes are called branches, and represent the diverging evolutionary paths that the groups within a node have taken, with the tips or leaves at the ends of these branches representing a single group, usually a species, or in our case, a Pokemon evolutionary family. I'm sure by now you're thinking, hey man, hasn't this already been done before? Hasn't a big name PokeTuber already listed and organized every known Pokemon into a huge phylogenetic tree of life and made a lengthy YouTube series explaining it in detail just like you're doing? And to you, viewer, I say, yes, I do know that Birdkeeper Toby has already listed and organized every known Pokemon into a huge phylogenetic tree of life and made a lengthy YouTube series explaining it in detail just like I'm doing. However, I think that Birdkeeper Toby gets a few things wrong. Don't get me wrong here, I have tons of respect for Birdkeeper Toby as an entertainer and a Pokemon content creator. Honestly, I watch his videos all the time. But I think that his tree, while absolutely gorgeous, is overall a little lacking in detail and clarity for my taste regarding how exactly Pokemon are related to each other, and contains a lot of speculative decisions that I personally don't agree with, as well as some scientific errors. But this series is by no means a response or rebuttal to Birdkeeper Toby or anyone else who has made a Pokemon phylogenetic tree in the past. I'm not really gonna directly addressed him or anyone else's ideas in this series. I'm just really excited to give my own interpretation on a Pokemon Tree of Life because I've worked on it for so long. After all, in real life science, it's important that researchers who come to different conclusions publicly publish their findings so that others can review them and determine the veracity of those findings so that we can all get closer to the truth. But wait, is there even one true interpretation of how Pokemon evolved and how a Pokemon phylogenetic tree should look? Heck no. Pokemon takes place in a science fiction and fantasy world, and I really don't think it was the intention of Game Freak for there to be a clear-cut way that Pokemon actually came to be in the world that they inhabit. While some later games make reference to the process of Darwinian evolution, with some Pokédex entries stating how some Pokemon are thought to share a common ancestor, or are speculated to be an ancestor to another living Pokemon, this kind of world building hasn't always been the case. In fact, depending on who you ask, back in the Red and Blue days, the interpretation was that Pokemon were a recent development in the world, originating after humans evolved, and had actually driven out all real animals to extinction, or near extinction. While the world building has been a lot more consistent in the last several generations, Pokemon are essentially just fantasy reinterpretations of animals or entities from folklore. I doubt that Game Freak has a natural history for these creatures outlined that's as deep as the real worlds or the ones that fans like me have decided to reconstruct. It's not like we can take a blood sample of a Hitmonchan, throw it in a gene analyzer, and view its genetic code in order to help us with our phylogenetic studies. In real life, we know that there is ultimately some true answer to what fish is closely related to another fish. If we could go back in time and look at how these populations of fish evolved over time into the species we can recognize today, we would be able to make a phylogenetic tree that is 100% accurate. Even though we can't do that, scientists can still get pretty close with modern advancements in gene analysis. Since we are analyzing the phylogenetics of creatures that aren't actually real and don't have much to analyze other than some plainly visible traits, some occasional snippets of lore, and also clear design influences from the real world, the construction of any Pokemon phylogeny is going to depend greatly on individual interpretation and drawing connections that more than likely were not intended by Game Freak or the game designers. All of this is basically to say, take everything I say in this series with a big grain of salt. While I've put a lot of time and thought into making a Pokemon Tree of Life that makes the most sense, your interpretation is ultimately as good as mine. I do not have any credentials or formal training in biology either. The only thing that possibly sets me apart from anyone else that would try to do the same thing I'm doing is that I'm passionate about it, and I've spent a lot of time poring over studies and online Tree of Life websites and Wikipedia articles. And I've also just spent so much time editing and rearranging this stupid diagram that I now practically have these circles and arrows burned into the back of my eyeballs for the rest of time. So if at any point you disagree with anything I say in the series or any of the decisions I make, just let me know in the comments section. Maybe I'll come around to addressing some alternative hypotheses in a future video. In fact, I bet many of you are probably flooding to the comments right now saying things like, when is this guy actually going to get to talk about the Pokemon? He promised us in the thumbnail and title that he would talk about legendary Pokemon, so when is he actually going to get to it? And to you, viewer, I say, right now. So yeah, I didn't want to make a part 1 video without actually discussing any Pokemon, and while we just spent the last while talking about phylogenetic trees, I think we should go ahead and address a small number of Pokemon that are not actually a part of any kind of ancestral phylogenetic relationship. These Pokemon are legendaries or mythicals that are extremely powerful, so much so that it can be implied that they aren't just ordinary creatures subject to natural selection, but were probably created directly by Arceus itself, basically the god of the Pokemon world. Now, Pokemon that are created in the supposed divine, supernatural way don't really reflect the way that any organisms are thought to have been created in our real world according to scientific findings. There are many myths, legends, and stories throughout many religions and faiths in the real world about how humans and other living things came to be through instantaneous divine creation, but an exact, literal interpretation of these stories never really lines up with the physical evidence scientists have gathered from paleontology, embryology, geology, etc. I'm not going to argue in this series if any religions or religious stories are or aren't true. That's kind of out of my jurisdiction for this channel, nor would I argue whether or not Darwinian evolution happens in our world, because it just does. And there are plenty of science-oriented channels and series on YouTube that do a way better job of explaining all of that than I ever could. However, as we know, the Pokemon world simply operates differently than ours does a lot of the time. As demonstrated in the games, we know for certain that there is a single deity that created the Pokemon universe and at least guided the formation of it, and that is Arceus. The legends of the Sinnoh region that call Arceus the original one, the creator of the Sinnoh region, and possibly the entire universe itself, are corroborated by encounters with Arceus by the player in the game Pokemon Legends Arceus, as the player gets to directly bear witness to Arceus' godlike abilities of telepathy, astral projection, and difficult-to-dodge barrages of lasers. Arceus' immense power is also on full display in the Heart Gold and Soul Silver event, where Arceus uses its creation abilities to make an egg containing a legendary Pokemon. As such, I think it's safe to put Arceus down at the bottom or core of our entire Pokemon tree, as the ultimate creator of the universe and all the Pokemon that reside within it. Soon after Arceus is said to have been born, the Creation Trio were created in their origin forms by Arceus to help control some essential aspect of reality. Dialga to control time, Palkia to control space, and Giratina, who represents antimatter, was banished to the Distortion world. Of course, these three have an additional form that they use when outside of their home dimensions that are a lot more familiar to humans. While these Pokemon appear similar to creatures such as dinosaurs or dragons, even being the dragon type, I think it's clear that these Pokemon don't share any actual direct genetic link to any reptilian, dinosaur, or dragon Pokemon, as they were pretty clearly created by Arceus directly. So on our tree, these three are going to go right above Arceus here, as they are directly connected to it. Now, Arceus is said to have used the power of its 1,000 arms to create the universe, and many believe that these 1,000 arms are actually the Pokemon Unknown. Again, the Heart Gold and Soul Silver Sinjoh Ruins event shows Arceus summoning many Unknown to create an egg of the legendary Pokemon, and there are other clues to Unknown's mysterious relationship to Arceus, such as the fact that the Pokegear in Heart Gold and Soul Silver picks up the signals that Unknown communicate with, and it interprets it as the melody that comes from the Azure Flute, which is the item needed to summon Arceus. As such, I think it's safe to say that Unknown is also directly tied to Arceus, like so. Similar to the Creation Trio, Arceus is said to have created another group of Pokemon at the beginning of the universe, the Lake Trio. These three Pokemon, Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf, who in modern times each reside at one of the Sinnoh region's 3 lakes, were said to be created by Arceus to subdue any member of the creation trio if they were ever to become enraged, and are also said to have taught humans the ability to feel and use emotions, knowledge, and willpower. Similarly to the creation trio, the lake trio is directly tied to Arceus and the creation trio. Okay, so we've covered the Pokemon we know for sure were created directly by Arceus, or at least have the closest association with it. So what's next? I believe that there are still a fair few Pokemon, legendary Pokemon, that fit certain criteria that renders them exempt from a true evolutionary relationship with most other Pokemon. These are certain legendary Pokemon that are shown to be exceptionally powerful in terms of lore, and some are implied to have had a hand in creating or maintaining the Pokemon world itself, or at least key components of it. Even if they may vaguely resemble some certain animal or Pokemon groups, their raw power and prevalence in ancient legends implies that there is usually only one in existence at a time, instead of a stable population capable of evolving over many generations. And this suggests to me that these Pokemon were created specially by Arceus. A great example of this kind of Pokemon are the Weather Trio, also known as the Super Ancient Pokemon, Kyogre, Groudon, and Rayquaza. Although they resemble certain animals in their body plans, Kyogre looks like a fish or a mosasaur, Groudon looks like a theropod dinosaur or some kind of lizard, and Rayquaza looks like a serpent, it seems that they're more likely related to each other more than anything else, especially considering their related powers and the similar markings they all have on their bodies. It may be possible that they could be ordinary Pokemon mutated or powered up by Arceus or some other force, but I don't think there's anything from the games or lore that really suggests that. These super ancient Pokemon are said by the Draconid people of Hoenn to have been born from the overflowing natural energy present during Hoenn's primal age, so it could be possible that these Pokemon were spontaneously created by this energy instead of from Arceus directly. Either way, it seems unlikely that these Pokemon should belong close to any animals they might resemble superficially in our evolutionary tree. Whether or not they were created by Arceus directly in the exact same way as the creation trio is up in the air, but at that point I think we're splitting hairs. I think it's safe to put them right here, stemming from a branch that comes right from Arceus. We have a very similar situation with the Aura Trio, Xerneas, Yveltal, and Zygarde. While Xerneas definitely resembles a deer and Yveltal some kind of bird creature, they have been shown to have a very unique biology and extreme levels of power that demonstrate they are also probably quite unique beings. For example, both Xerneas and Yveltal are capable of transforming into a dormant, cocoon-like state when they run out of or absorb large amounts of energy that they need to stay alive, which is not something that birds or deer are known to do. Not to mention the extremely important roles they play in the Kalos region's ecosystem, as they are capable of manipulating extreme power over preserving life or destroying it. They are also stated in ancient legends to be able to live for thousands of years so long as they can return to cocoon states to rest. I'm going to put Xerneas and Yveltal down here with these other legendaries as well. Zygarde, the third member of this legendary trio, at first may appear to be a special case. After all, its design origins are closely linked to real biological organisms and reflect the real-world evolutionary process of evolving from unicellularity to multicellularity. Basically, creatures that used to consist of only single cells evolving to combine and work together to become multicellular organisms like you and me. So, as tempting as it is to sort Zygarde somewhere among the most primitive of the truly biological Pokemon, I have to place it right here with Xerneas and Yveltal. Similar to its trio mates, Zygarde is so immensely powerful and ancient that it appears far more likely to be a unique creation rather than a novel form of organism that evolved through natural means. All Pokemon have some kind of supernatural or elemental power not seen in real animals, but it's nothing like this. Plus, like the Weather Trio, these three Pokemon just feel made for each other, and it seems like they were created to oversee an important element of the world and keep each other in check. Even their abilities all interact. Xerneas and Yveltal's abilities boost their own power, while Zygarde's Aura Break ability's only function is to negate the effects of Xerneas and Yveltal's. It feels far more preordained as opposed to fully natural organisms that have fallen into a set of interconnected niches on their own through evolution by natural selection. Although Zygarde is very unique in its powers and bodily structure compared to Xerneas and Yveltal, I'm going to place it right here with them among the special legendaries created by Arceus. In a similar manner, we are also going to place the forces of nature down here, which are Tornadus, Thundurus, Landorus, and Enamorus, who have powers that represent and have sway over different elements of nature as well as the seasons. They may not be quite as powerful as the Pokemon we've discussed already in terms of lore, competitive play notwithstanding, but because of their power and uniqueness, I can't really see these Pokemon being fully natural either. They have their own legends describing how they've been around since ancient times and done some pretty typical legendary things, like fight and destroy the land until a third one shows up and calms them down. They also each have a Therian form that is said to be their true form, changing dramatically in body plan, so any other creatures they may genetically be related to is difficult to determine. As such, they're going down here with the rest of the legendaries discussed so far. A couple of odd cases here are Regigigas and Heatran. Both are said to have had important roles in shaping the Pokemon world, with legends of Regigigas pulling the continents with a rope, and Heatran said to be the embodiment of the Earth's core. While I am more inclined to literally believe the legends about Heatran than the ones about Regigigas, there's no denying that these Pokemon are extremely powerful and ancient. It's also worth pointing out that there's more than likely only one each in the world, just like all the other legendaries discussed so far, although curiously, Heatran is capable of being either male or female. I think Regigigas and Heatran both fit very well among these other Pokemon as powerful, ancient, world-shaping beings, although maybe for Heatran I could see some people thinking it belongs with the metal or mineral Pokemon, or even is a frog or a spider or something. But as we've discussed, just because one of these legendaries has the same vague body plan of other groups of creatures does not necessarily imply a genetic evolutionary relationship. Something else we should bring up here are the other Regi Pokemon, or Titan Pokemon. Basically, the Pokemon created by Regigigas out of various materials or energy. These Pokemon being Regirock, Regice, Registeel, Regidrago, and Regieleki. While it may be tempting to sort these Pokemon by what they are made of, rocks, metal, etc., I believe that the closest thing these Pokemon have to any genetic or phylogenetic relationship is that with their creator, Regigigas, and should be sorted into the tree as such. Also, you tell me where Regidrago and Regieleki are supposed to go otherwise. What even is Dragon Energy? The next legendary group I'd like to discuss are the Tau Trio, being Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem. It's pretty clear that these Pokemon aren't just dragons or dinosaurs or some other kind of reptile, based on their immense power and unique physiology. Even though we shouldn't entirely base our tree on the ancient legends and stories surrounding any of these Pokemon, the information on what exactly these things are is pretty mysterious and convoluted. The legends and stories discussing these Pokemon and their origins vary pretty wildly between each other, but the theory I believe fans have constructed to harmonize all of these stories is basically an original dragon Pokemon crashed to Earth from space in the form of a Dragonstone, similar to the Lightstone or Darkstone shown in the games, which are the weakened forms of Reshiram and Zekrom respectively. This is actually speculated by Professor Juniper in Black and White 2. After that, the original dragon would go on to split up into two dragons, who would each join one twin brother and wage war across Unova, fighting for the power of either truth or ideals, like we all know, with the original dragon's true form, that being Zekrom, Reshiram, and Kyurem combined, not actually being something we get to see in-game, with players only being able to fuse Kyurem with either Reshiram or Zekrom one at a time. I spent a long time debating whether or not these three should be sorted into the category of extraterrestrial Pokemon instead of these super important ancient legendaries because they are known to come from space. I ultimately decided to base this decision on pretty subjective reasons, given that Reshiram and Zekrom are iconic box legendaries, and that being extraterrestrial isn't really a huge part of their lore or a factor in their designs, so I decided to designate them as such here. This distinction might make a little more sense when I get into alien Pokemon in the next video. The final Pokemon that I want to include in this group today is Mew. Mew, as we've all been told, has the DNA of every Pokemon within its cells. This is why it's able to use the move Transform and can learn any move by TM. However, this actually seems to be kind of the inverse of what we currently understand about the last universal common ancestor to life on Earth. Scientists do agree that there was a single organism or population of organisms that did act as the last universal common ancestor, because all living things alive today share some genetic code, and it's insanely unlikely that those similarities would arise from completely different lineages. However, scientists also agree that this last universal common ancestor, which would be extremely simple, containing merely the foundation for all future organisms, such as DNA, a water-based cytoplasm, and a phospholipid bilayer cell wall. This is a far cry from what we see with Mew, who is stated to actually have the DNA of any possible Pokemon within itself. Maybe we're extrapolating things a little too far from that line in the Pokédex, and after all, the Pokédex has been known to be incorrect or prone to exaggeration from time to time. Perhaps it merely means that Mew has the genetic potential of any possible Pokemon life form, with a genetic code that's malleable and pure in a way that allows it to take on other forms and learn just about any move. However, I still do believe that Mew is actually the last universal common ancestor to the rest of all Pokemon. It may not reflect exactly how things happened on Earth, but again, Pokemon physics, history, and biology don't exactly play by our rules. In fact, I think it makes a lot of sense. Why else would Pokemon that are based on things like plants or rocks be capable of having limbs and brains and eyes and other biological elements if the common ancestor to all Pokemon didn't also have some of these traits? Mew could very well be the explanation for why Pokemon that appear like trees or snowflakes or ghosts all share a number of common biological traits, even though they otherwise appear very different. And of course, we can't bring up Mew without bringing up its clone, Mewtwo. I'm not going to put Mewtwo into the man-made Pokemon category, because although it was made by humans, it is a clone of Mew, which means that it has a very close and direct genetic relationship with it. So we're going to put it right here. And I think that is where we are going to end off for today. So I'm sure by now some of you are wondering, why did you leave out so many other legendaries and mythicals from this group? And to you I say, we're gonna get there. It would kind of defeat the point of me doing the series in the order that I am if I just got ahead of myself the whole time and talked about things that could maybe potentially fit into one group or another. But basically any legendary or mythical Pokemon that hasn't been included in this group of super powerful, unique legendaries, probably because they aren't as powerful or world-changing in terms of lore, or it's been shown that more than one of them can exist at one time, or that they can reproduce through more conventional means, or that they fit pretty snugly somewhere else on the family tree. For example, Ho-Oh is shown to have immense power, not only in its base stats, but also in its ability in the lore to resurrect people and Pokemon. However, based on its physiology, it's pretty clearly just a kind of bird, so I can say it more than likely evolved from other birds. Other Pokemon like Zeraora, Manaphy, Zacian, Zamazenta, the Swords of Justice are all quite strong and unique in their own right, but their abilities and roles in the ecosystem are not world-altering, and they resemble other animals quite a bit. All mythical and legendary Pokemon may be powerful and elusive in their own right. Maybe their extreme power and long lifespans were even gifted to them by some kind of mystical means, such as Arceus, but in a phylogenetic sense, as in what other Pokemon these powerful beings are genetically related to, these Pokemon belong elsewhere at the tree than at the very bottom. Alright, that is it for today's episode. Next time we are going to cover the extraterrestrial or alien Pokemon. Basically anything we can say for sure is not from the Pokemon equivalent of Earth. If you agree or disagree with anything I've said today, please feel free to tell me down in those comments. Controversial opinions work wonders for feeding the YouTube algorithm monster, so go ahead and tell me everything that I got wrong. Honestly, I'd love to hear it. And as always, just thank you guys for watching this far, and I hope to catch you in the next one. See you later, stay safe, take it easy.